Is Prime Minister Justin Trudeau looking into forming a coalition with NDP leader Jagmeet Singh? There's a lot of speculation on that front, and it's an idea that Conservative leader Erin O'Toole says we cannot afford. To discuss this in more detail is political reporter Brian Lilley, joining us once again from Toronto. Brian, many Canadians feel like our PM and Jagmeet Singh have already formed an alliance.
Kind of feels that way. It's difficult to tell them apart sometimes. Liberals used to say, well, New Democrats are just liberals in a hurry. And now with Justin Trudeau and his very ideological government, it's, no, they're leaving the NDP behind. They want to sprint past them in moving towards their utopian socialist vision. So it's tough to say. But there have been some discussions. How far will they go? How deep will this be? We don't really know. According to some, there's nothing to worry about. According to others, yeah, they held talks, but it didn't go too far. But they haven't stopped talking, so we'll see. But Erin O'Toole, the Conservative leader, is absolutely right. He came out in a news conference Monday saying, we can't afford this. This is a danger to Canada. Because if you remember the NDP spending plan, and they would have to do some of the NDP spending to keep them on board, to keep the Liberals in power for a long time. The NDP spending plan was something like $200 billion of new spending. It was far and away larger than any other party and, quite frankly, detached from reality. So if you thought the government was spending a lot now, just wait until you see if this coalition does come to fruition.
You know, Brian, it's no secret, speaking of spending, that the cost of living has been going up quite a bit over the past couple of years. Housing, groceries, gas. We've talked about inflation, which is now at around 4.5%. Groceries, yeah, they've skyrocketed. And you say they could go even higher, especially when it comes to our meat and dairy industries?
Well, we're already seeing double-digit increases when it comes to meat. We've seen that for the past couple of months with the Consumer Price Index, the inflation report from Stats Canada. Now, the Canadian Dairy Commission has given a raise of, I believe it's 8.4% to Canada's dairy farmers. So the cost of dairy is going to go up in terms of anything made with milk. So we're talking the milk you and your kids drink, the cream you put in your coffee, the cheese that you have on your pizza, or, just on a sandwich or whatever at home. All of that's going to go up. Now, at the same time, we saw the Prime Minister and his large delegation from my understanding, Canada had the largest delegation at the UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow, and their big push there was to reduce methane emissions. Now, the Prime Minister, as he often does, targeted Alberta with that, saying 75% reduction of methane emissions from the oil and gas industry. But they're also, Hal, talking about going after the cows, the pigs, the sheep, the goats, anything that puts out methane in food production. They want us to lower it. I wrote about this last week. I got a lot of reaction from it. And then, as if on cue, this big piece in the Toronto Star, that bastion of liberalism, saying, well, we have to get rid of the dairy industry if we're going to meet our climate change targets. So, yes, these things are going to go up in price due to inflation, due to the Dairy Commission, but also environmentalists want to make it harder for you to get, more expensive for you to consume, so that you consume less of it. They want fewer cows to save the planet. I don't know who we're saving the planet for if we need to have fewer people and fewer animals on it and just vegetation everywhere.
And Brian, the Bank of Canada said higher inflation rates would be temporary, but now, that's what they said originally, but now they have warnings that the high inflation could continue for a little while longer.
Well, I guess it depends on your definition of temporary. The economic term is transitory. And when the last inflation report came out, the Bank of Montreal said this is straining the definition of transitory because it's been going on so long. And now they're talking into the next year. Are we going to see a rate hike as well that will push up the cost of your mortgage, credit cards, all of that? That could absolutely happen. And especially if you're on a variable rate mortgage, that's something that you're going to have to be considering. So all of these things coming into play as the bank tries to tell us that it's nothing to worry about. And yet, what are we concerned about? What are Canadians, what's one of their top priorities right now? And that is the cost of living going up, something that was a big issue in the election and continues to be. And they're saying this will continue into next year, if not 2023.
Brian, the federal Conservatives unveiled their shadow cabinet on Tuesday. Pierre Poilievre is back in at finance, and Calgary's Michelle Rempel-Garner will be the critic for natural resources. What do you really read into this?
Well, I read into it a bit of a more aggressive stance. Rempel-Garner definitely can be aggressive on any file she's on. She was the health critic in the last parliament, and now she's been put into natural resources at a time when Justin Trudeau's most ideological minister, Stephen Guilbeault, has been put in charge of the environment, and John Wilkinson, another hardcore environmentalist, put in charge of natural resources. So these two men have essentially been told to go shut down Canada's oil and gas industry in any way that you can. She's going to be the pit bull staring them down and trying to protect Alberta, Saskatchewan, to a lesser degree Newfoundland and Labrador, and the oil and gas production that we have in this country. Pierre Poilievre had been the finance critic. He was incredibly popular in that role. Some felt perhaps too popular, overshadowing the leader. So he was taken out and put into a jobs portfolio before the last election after O'Toole won. O'Toole said, no, that's, we were talking about jobs, and that's why he was put in there. Don't read too much into it. He says that Pierre Poilievre will make Liberals quiver when he stands to ask questions, and he wants him on the finance portfolio, staring down the Liberals over the issue we just talked about, inflation, talking about the cost of living. Poilievre has been a stalwart on that in terms of his social media presence during the time when Parliament's not sitting. He continues to raise the issue. He continues to raise the ire of economists who say, you just don't understand. Well, no, he understands it from the point of view of his constituents and Canadians across the country who know that they're paying more, regardless of what economic modeling might be saying.
Now, Brian, you've got a good pulse of what's happening on the Hill, and especially the Conservative Party of Canada. Any more talk of a leadership review, and then maybe potentially Pierre Poilievre maybe taking a run at the leadership?
Pierre Poilievre was someone who was expected to run in the last leadership, which was a showdown between Peter MacKay and Aaron O'Toole. He bowed out the night before. I'd been in conversation with him. He was going to announce in the morning. I got a text saying, nope, it's not happening. He cited his young family. He's since had a second child since that decision was made. So we're talking about a toddler and a newborn. I don't think that this is the time for Pierre Poilievre. I don't think he wants it. And there's no official leadership review at the moment for the Conservative Party. Not that Aaron O'Toole doesn't have issues on his hands and challenges to his leadership, but there's no official way for the party to dump him at the moment without going through an awful lot of hoops.
Yeah, Brian, Aaron O'Toole continues to have challenges dealing with questions about his caucus and vaccinations. Ed Fast and Dean Allison are sponsoring petitions against vaccines and vaccine passports. Marilyn Gladue has announced the start of a civil liberties caucus to raise issues surrounding COVID-19. Brian, this really can't be good for the Conservative Party of Canada.
It's not, especially in the way that some of them are handling it, in particular Gladue, because the way she has presented herself in the Civil Liberties Caucus, she may as well have just declared it's the anti-vax caucus. And if you don't like vaccines, that's fine. Most Canadians are on board with it. When we're talking about 85% of the country being fully vaccinated, you're going to be turning off a lot of voters. And Gladue, look, there are important issues to raise here. The PCR test that you need to still come back into Canada. So the land border open, you can go across, but coming back, it's going to be expensive. That's an important issue. People losing their jobs over vaccine mandates, important civil liberties issues. But in this climate where public sentiment doesn't matter, how much you think, well, this is the right way to do it. If you're not bringing the audience with you, if you're not bringing the public with you, then you're just turning the public off. And in politics, if you're explaining, you're losing. Right now, Aaron O'Toole is having to explain an awful lot about what his MPs are doing, what they believe, whether they're vaccinated, are they anti-vaxxers, are they anti-science? Some of them are appearing that way. And all that does is give Justin Trudeau another opportunity to pick up the COVID vaccine stick and beat the Conservatives with it. And that's what he did last week. O'Toole's out there trying to raise serious issues about this coalition, about inflation, and he's getting questions, understandably so, about his MPs, including Gladue, who says, COVID is not a big risk like polio. that's a head scratcher that is going to leave an awful lot of members of the public saying, are these guys serious? She's not handling it well. Some of the others aren't handling it well. That only hurts the party and it hurts O'Toole.
So when people talk about this being a separate caucus, does that mean there may be splitting away from the party? How does it really work?
Not yet, although that could happen. We'll see how things go. If there's enough unhappiness on either side, you could end up with a different party. But look, a caucus is just an informal grouping of politicians, and there are all kinds of caucuses within the parliamentary system. You've got the party caucuses, right? We all know that the Liberal Party caucus met for the first time this week. The Conservatives have one, the NDP, and then you've got regional ones based on geography. Toronto has its own caucus. Ontario, Alberta has a caucus, and members from sometimes across party lines will meet to discuss issues. There's a Great Lakes caucus. There's a Canada-U.S. Friendship Caucus, things like that. The Parliamentary Pro-Life Caucus is another example. So this one is not meant to say, oh, we're going to break away and form our own party. But depending on how this goes down, I could see that happening if enough of them, and we've heard that some MPs are just going to show up and push their way in, even if they're not vaccinated. O'Toole said don't do that. Those sorts of things start happening, you may have a breakaway or splinter group out there.
So Brian, how about the potential of maybe joining Maxime Bernier in the PPC?
That's a surefire way to end up on the unemployment line. If you look at Maxime Bernier, I mean, he had a seat in the House of Commons. He's since lost it twice in the Beauce and also lost some by-elections, including here in Toronto. I don't see that being a viable option for them. Could they break away and sit as independents? Perhaps. But moving over to the PPC brand with Bernier, if they were going to do it, they should have done it a couple of years ago.
Now, another internal issue for the Tories is that the party sent a letter to National Councillor Bert Chen asking for phone, text, and email records of his attempt to oust the leader. Tell me more about that.
Well, you might remember Bert Chen. He was the guy who came out right after the election. He called me the morning after. I was the first person to write about Bert Chen being a national councillor on the Conservative Party Board of Advisors, essentially. He called me the morning after the election saying O'Toole has to go. And, okay, this wasn't, I said, are we on the record? He said, yes. This is not somebody I'd ever dealt with before, cold calling me out of the blue. So Bert Chen then went on to start a petition calling for the leader to go. And he was suspended by National Council. So it's not a legal demand. It definitely looks like one. It comes from a lawyer by the name of Arthur Hamilton, who's represented the party off and on over the years. And he sent the letter asking for, show us what you've got. If you want us to trust you, is the gist of the letter. You want us to trust you, tell us who you were talking to. Because there is a feeling among some national councillors that they can't trust Bert Chen. They can't be open and have full discussions with this man at this time because they feel he's trying to undermine the party. Others are going to rally to Chen and say, no, wait a minute. You can't go around demanding that somebody turn over their personal communications. You have no right to it. The letter doesn't make a legal demand, but it does ask for this. It's just all around a bad look at this point where O'Toole's having other challenges while trying to raise real issues. It takes the focus off of what it should be, which is Justin Trudeau. We had an election, Hal, because it was the most serious time. It's the most serious election, most important election since the Second World War. Parliament's still not back. The government's still not acting on very real issues that matter to Canadians. We should be talking about that. Parliament should be back. Those should be the questions being asked, not the internal workings of the Conservative Party, which unfortunately is where we're at.
Many Canadians were happy to see the land border with the United States finally reopen. Here in southwestern Alberta, the Coutts border crossing, hundreds upon hundreds of vehicles, were lined up for about 7 to 10 kilometers. But what about that PCR test when folks re-enter Canada? Let's talk a bit about that.
Well, let's hope, and we mentioned that just a moment ago, let's hope that gets pulled away shortly, because that's something that people have said is going to be an impediment for crossing. You can't live near the border without knowing how many Canadian families have, honestly, within a half hour's drive of each other. You've got family in the United States, and you haven't seen them in a year and a half. you want to go over for a Sunday visit. Are you going to do that if it's going to cost you as much as $225 to get a PCR test? There are cheaper ones. And, I heard yesterday during some of the coverage, you could get a PCR test in the States for as cheap as $75. But, okay, family of four, $75 to go see grandma across the border, that's $300 each and every trip. So there is talk, and Dr. Theresa Tam has said that they'll be reviewing this. There's been some medical experts have said that this isn't really an accurate way of trying to track and contain COVID-19. Others say it's a tool that we have to keep. So that debate's ongoing. For families looking to travel, think of myself, I'm hoping it's going to go. The good news, though, Hal, is there were some spots, as you mentioned, with long lines, and then friends of my parents were, I'm on the first at the Ambassador Bridge crossing from Windsor into Detroit. It took them 12 minutes to go across the border. That's not bad even for non-COVID times, and without an almost 2-year window of the border not operating properly. So it's good to see it open again. Let's hope that we continue down this path and we make it easier, not harder, for these families.
Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Hal.